Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Raquel Solomon, and I have the pleasure this afternoon of welcoming you to the annual Sachs Student Lecture, A Strategy for Sustainable Development in the United States, and also the pleasure of introducing to you Professor Jeffrey Sachs. First, I'd like to begin by saying a little bit about myself. I'm currently a senior at the School of General Studies, majoring in Sustainable Development at French. Originally, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and I moved to New York City as a dancer. When I was injured, I launched somewhat unenthusiastically a career in the business world. But it wasn't until I came to Columbia University that I found my true calling, a calling that was somewhat influenced by the example of Jeffrey Sachs. In the spring of 2012, I had just returned from a semester in South Africa, where I had done independent research on the country's energy crisis. Then I took a course with Professor Sachs on the challenges of sustainable development. From this course, I developed a better understanding of the linkage between fossil fuel use and climate change, the ecological trade-offs associated with economic growth, and the relationship between geography, disease, and poverty. In a sense, I had been exposed to these problems before through my volunteer work in Africa and having grown up in a developing country. What was important, though, about Professor Sachs's approach was his ability to identify solutions that would empower poor populations to improve their circumstances, be it through the sustainable use of natural resources such as fish or timber, the use of bed nets to prevent the spread of malaria, or investing in infrastructure or technology that's needed to kickstart an economy into self-sufficiency. Shortly thereafter, I had the opportunity to hear Dr. Sachs speak at the Rio+20 United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development. At a session on educating for a sustainable future, Professor Sachs stressed the need to teach current and future generations about sustainable development. He spoke of the field as encompassing a new subject matter, an interdisciplinary curriculum, an understanding of science, social processes, culture, human values, and the knowledge that it takes to live in a global society. I resolved to take what I had learned at Columbia about sustainable development and to share it with others. At the U.S. mission to South Africa in Johannesburg, I led a workshop for students from the township of Mamelodi. We talked about Africa's special challenges and vulnerabilities to development, including climate change, and possible solutions that could allow poor African populations to break free from a cycle of poverty. From this experience, I saw that young people today are receptive to learning about concepts such as environmental sustainability and intergenerational equity, so long as you can explain it to them in terms they can understand. Although I have yet to achieve my long-term goals, I hope to try to ease the lives of women and children in Africa and in the Caribbean by helping to implement large-scale policies in sustainable development and to be a proponent for education in this emerging field. Through his commitment, foresight, passion, as a leader and educator, Professor Sachs has been a source of inspiration for myself and for many other students. It is indeed an honor to introduce to you the Director of the Earth Institute, Catholic Professor of Sustainable Development and Professor of Health Policy and Management at Columbia University, Special Advisor to the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on the Millennium Development Goals, Director of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and world-renowned author. Please join me in heartily welcoming Professor Jeffrey Sachs.
Beautiful. Raquel, thanks so much. Wow. I wish you could just go on and on, not about me, but about sustainable development, because you've explained so beautifully, Raquel, why we're here and why this emerging way of thinking about our problems is so important. Sustainable development, I predict, will be the leading challenge for you and your fellow students in the decades to come that will be the crucible of your lives, because the world is facing a set of challenges that are so complicated and coming from so many directions that when you try to encompass in an adequate way an understanding of all of these challenges, you're led to what I believe is a new way to understand these problems, an emerging field and an emerging political movement, a worldwide movement, I hope, which has been underway for years quietly, but gaining ground. One of the most important things that came out of the Rio +20 summit that Raquel mentioned, where wonderful that you and other students participated and governments met to consider the ongoing failures to achieve sustainable development on the planet, despite 20 years of treaties that had been set at the Rio 1992 summit. The governments declared that we need a set of sustainable development goals to help shape the world's understanding and the world's direction in the coming years, and that maybe those sustainable development goals in the period after 2015 can play a role like the Millennium Development Goals have helped to play during the years from 2000 and what will be up to 2015, to draw attention and public understanding to major, complicated challenges that can get lost in the day-to-day headlines and the day-to-day media, but beneath the surface are the slower moving but even more dramatic and critical developments. And I'm hoping that those sustainable development goals get set, get agreed by the world, and in a way my talk today is a little bit directed towards them, because I think that if we do get such goals, they will apply at least as much and in many ways more to the United States than to any poor country. Our country needs these goals and needs this redirection as much as any society in the world. And today's talk is really about the idea that the concept of sustainable development, when understood and applied, could be a very fruitful approach for addressing America's problems. This is not the way we address these problems right now. When you read the newspapers or look at editorials or read blogs or listen to the debates, the idea that America's problems are somehow a reflection of the challenges of sustainable development won't be apparent at all. We might be debating whether to have a stimulus or tax cuts or spending increases or many other things that we debate day in, day out. But I want to suggest today that these ways that we've been looking at these problems in recent years are not adequate. They're not leading us to solutions, and they are the wrong categories for the problems that we face. And I want to offer my hunch that sustainable development as a field, as a way of thinking, as a set of goals, as an ethos, can be a framework that can be very fruitful for America in the years ahead. I think it fits very well, and that's really what I want to describe today. While this is an absolutely gorgeous day outside, and I thank you for being inside just to catch a little bit of shade from the beautiful sun, and while this campus houses so many wonderful things that when we're here we feel at home and we feel that all is right with the world in many ways, the truth is, as all of you know, American society is not in good shape. And the changes taking place in this country to a very significant extent are not healthful ones. And not ones that are pointing in a constructive direction for our country. In a way, this is very peculiar because this is an enormously successful country. And in material ways, this country has everything that can be imagined. Not everything by everybody, but everything in the aggregate many times over. This country lacks nothing, basically, that one would need for a good, fulfilling, healthy life and a good, fulfilling opportunity for everybody in the society. But clearly we are not in that condition right now. Despite having achieved a level of income and wealth that was unimaginable to all of humanity in all but the most recent years, the United States finds itself in a crisis. It's a crisis of economy, it's a crisis of society, it's a crisis of politics, it's a crisis of individual well-being, it's a crisis of ethics. It's paradoxical because if one had been told 50 or 100 years ago that the average income in the United States would be $50,000 as it is per capita, people would have been unable to contemplate all of the wonderful things and all of the great benefits and all of the vast improvements that would spring forth from that. And somehow we are to this day failing to translate that marvel of productivity, of technology, of skills, of built capital, of hard work of earlier generations and hard work of this generation into the kind of lives that are not only fulfilling and enriching for the broad part of society, but also are sustainable in the sense that they will help to meet needs of today's children, today's young people, and future generations. When I say that America's not in good shape, I have several things in mind, and let me highlight them. First, and to my mind most worrying, is the fact that America has created a not fully impervious, but nearly impervious two-class society. We have a high-income part of this country at the very top of the income distribution, maybe the top decile, arguably the top quintile, that is doing very well, that feels, on the whole, confident materially, that has a very good chance of raising children who will be healthy and able to go to good schools and able to go on to a good education. And we have another part of society which was at some point perhaps 20 or 30%, but now I think has risen to 50 or 60% of our society that is stuck or worse, where the prospects for holding a decent job have declined markedly, where the prospects of finishing a college education for a young person growing up in a working class household have diminished, not increased, even as the needs to finish a college degree have definitely increased in the labor market, where we have about 2.5 million, mostly young people, behind bars at any time, and the highest incarceration rate in the whole world, and where increasingly that's actually almost a gulag system because these young people are working at essentially nearly forced labor, producing commercial products for companies, hidden from view, hidden from the rest of society, and their young children are growing up without fathers and in a cycle of entering the same systematic destruction. It's a part of our country that most of us never have a clear view of, don't really understand, but the numbers are absolutely staggering. And if one said we have a prison wage system in this country, you'd be accused of being out of your mind. But that's exactly what we have, and it's a reflection of the fact that we have a part of society that is absolutely unknown to the elites. The second part of this that is related, but I think is a different phenomenon, is the fact that we have a nearly lawless financial system at this point. And this is not exactly news, but it is also not getting under control. We're a few miles from Wall Street here, but the waves of the behavior down the street reach the whole world. Wall Street behaved so badly, so systematically corruptly, so recklessly and immorally that it brought the whole world economy into crisis. And when it did so, it was quickly bailed out. The titans of the industry received their regular invitations to the White House, and life went on as usual. And yesterday brought a rather stunning page of a new chapter of this reality to us. I really enjoyed it. I've marked all over it. I'll tell you what I marked up. But these are 8 of our leading officials on Wall Street, 8 leaders who each took home about $1 billion in compensation last year. Now, it's a pretty extraordinary story. Many of these investors lost money last year or didn't beat the market. At least one of them, Stephen A. Cohen, is under investigation for insider trading, and one of his lead officers was taken out in handcuffs last week from Park Avenue, but Mr. Cohen still took home $1.4 billion in compensation last year. I did a quick check of their friends in high places, and indeed they have friends in high places throughout the Senate, throughout the House of Representatives, no doubt in the White House as well. Mr. Daniel Loeb, who took home $380 million last year from his hedge fund, also contributed $551,000 of campaign contributions last year. Now remember, our politicians work for cheap. So $551,000 is a lot of money for these folks. And basically, we have a system in place where massive abuse, almost complete scorn for the legal system and for the regulations are easily brushed aside because of the protection money that these individuals pay to the political class. One by one, if you look at their campaign contributions, they're really astounding. Mr. David Tepper tops the list of having a paycheck last year of $2.2 billion. There isn't an individual on the planet in any conceivable configuration who has a marginal product anywhere close to that, and certainly not Mr. Tepper. But he did spend $601,000 in noted campaign contributions last year, and I'm sure that will do him good stead when it allows him and his colleagues to keep their money at tax rates much lower than you and I pay, to launder their money through reinsurance companies in Bermuda, which is the latest trick because of identified loophole, of which there are many in the tax code, which allow you to funnel your money tax-free into your own funds if you set up a reinsurance company that doesn't actually do any insurance in one of the tax havens which are conveniently placed nearby the U.S. coast in your region of the Caribbean. And the Caribbean, of course, has become a little playground for the financial industry because these hedge funds are to a very large extent domiciled in the Caribbean. They pay no taxes in this domicile. And our major companies like Google and Apple and others have learned, with the support of the Internal Revenue Service, to park their international profits also tax-free in these havens. You probably didn't realize that the intellectual capital of Google, which is quite substantial and paid for by the taxpayers through the National Science Foundation when we trained a really brilliant young man named Sergey Brin, that intellectual property now resides in Bermuda. Interesting, huh? A lot of good work must have been done in Bermuda, which is, of course, the home of Stanford University. Or do I have that confused? But Mr. Brin is able to put the intellectual property in Bermuda. When international profits of Google are made, you pay royalties back to the parent for intellectual property, which, lo and behold, is in a zero-tax regime. So the second funny aspect of America is how we've been completely bamboozled by a out-of-control, illegal, and corrupt financial system, which is deeply intertwined with our political system. And so cleverly, the rules are all set so most of what is done is actually legal, just outrageous. When it's done elsewhere, we call it massive corruption, and we huff and puff. When it's done here, it's called freedom and campaign finance by the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, that leads me to the third problem in America, which is the collapse of political legitimacy. The latest survey for the U.S. Congress shows an acceptance rate, an approval rate of 13% for what is supposed to be our lead democratic institution. We have the facade of democracy. We have the trappings of democracy. We do not have the functioning of representation, and the public knows it. And this shows up not only in the corruption of the financial system and the breaking of laws and in the lack of legal enforcement, but it shows up in the fact that what the public wants cannot get translated into law. We'll probably see that this week with the weapons legislation, where the public at least overwhelmingly wants background checks, which probably won't actually occur, or if they do, with massive loopholes. But that's just the thin tip of a breakdown of representation that takes place in the United States. There's a wonderful book that was written this past year by a Princeton political scientist called Affluence and Influence, which I strongly recommend. What he did was to take opinion surveys on many issues of public policy, and Martin Willens is the author's name, and he correlated those attitudes toward with the income levels of the respondents to these surveys. And what he showed statistically is that the actual policies that are adopted do not respond to public attitudes at all, except the attitudes of the top decile of the population. So the views at the top of the income distribution have a very strong effect on the actual outcomes of legislation. But the views of the poor have no effect whatsoever on the votes by their representatives, and the views of the middle class generally have no weight in the actual outcomes of policy deliberations in this country. This is not radical surmising. It's good, hard political science econometrics, and it's really worth a read, but it will simply reconfirm what you might suspect. Now, the fourth of my five areas of concern is the growing ecological crisis, the one that we only seem to be able to focus on in the midst of a dire emergency, whether it was the superstorm last November or Katrina in 2005, or an increasing number of other ecological disasters hitting this country and hitting the world. 2012 was the warmest year in instrument record for the United States in history. July 2012 was the warmest single month that this country has ever had in the instrument history. The drought that still sits over the western half of the United States was one of the worst droughts and continues to be one of the worst droughts in modern history. It covered about 60% of U.S. counties at its maximum extent, and it still covers about half of the U.S. counties till today. We lost about 20% of the grain and soybean crop last year. That set food prices soaring, especially felt by poor people who pay naturally a higher proportion of their total consumption in food. Most of the rest of us didn't notice it because food is such a modest part of the budget that it may be an inconvenience, but for many people it's a life and death issue when this happens. We went through an entire presidential campaign where this drought was not mentioned. The heaviest point of the drought, by the way, is over the U.S. Southwest, where our scientists say deep climate reasoning suggests that this is a footprint of long-term human-induced climate change, the kind of change that one would be expecting from the trends that we're on, indeed. The response of Governor Perry and the Texas legislature was decisive. Last April, there was a 3-day Pray for Rain weekend declared for Texas, which did not succeed in the event. But Governor Perry remains one of the staunchest opponents of action on human-induced climate change. It's not hard to understand why. The climate change view is measured almost perfectly by the distance from an oil company that you happen to occupy. And so Mr. Perry is a product of the oil industry. He is a pawn of the oil industry. He is a spokesperson of the oil industry, and he will fight this to the death of his own state and to the dying of the Rio Grande River and to the destruction of the ecosystems of the U.S. Southwest. And that's more or less like what's happening in other parts of the country. We are a petro economy to a significant extent. The oil sector, together with Wall Street, are the two great sectors of vested interest. I'd add on one more, which is the health economy, which is another one that's out of control. Those are the three great lobbying centers of America, the three great campaign contributors of this country. But oil tops all of them. And we have not been ready even to discuss the ecological crisis. President Obama mentioned climate change once in last year's campaign at his acceptance speech for the party nomination. He did not mention it all the way through to the end of the campaign. He kind of swallowed uneasily when he was endorsed by Mayor Bloomberg and on the day that Superstorm Sandy hit, because the mayor said that the president supports action against climate change. In the American political context, that just means he's not an ardent climate change skeptic. It doesn't mean he actually does anything, but it does mean that unlike Mr. Romney and the many other politicians, he's not fighting the concept. But President Obama's supposed climate change policy is called all of the above for energy, which means that we will promote renewable energy, but we will also drill for oil, we'll drill for gas, we'll open up offshore reserves. We will we will almost certainly see the new Keystone Pipeline approved within the next few weeks. I'd give you 10-to-1 odds on that if anyone's in a betting mood. And all of the above is not a policy. I call it a lobbyist dream. What could be better than all of the above? Everybody gets a chance at the action. And this is another part of our drift. And the fifth area that I would mention is a foreign policy that has become increasingly militarized at almost every turn. We have almost no diplomacy anymore that I can see. We have drone missiles an arc of conflict of publicly known and then many secret conflict sites that basically stretch from Mali in West Africa all the way through Somalia, Yemen, across the Arabian Peninsula, into Western Asia, into the frontier provinces of Pakistan, and of course Afghanistan. It's about 8,000 miles long, and U.S. mercenaries, soldiers, and drone missiles are occupied along the entire stretch. To my mind, this is a region of hunger, poverty, and environmental crisis. We work in a lot of these countries and a lot of these regions that have been beset by deepening drought, because this is a long belt of low rainfall regions that have experienced now a significant decline over the last 30 years in average rainfall, combined with a massive increase of population because of very high fertility rates in these countries. This is leading to extreme poverty, instability, hunger, and violence. And our approach to this violence, unfortunately, is to see it as a military and security threat, because indeed it becomes one as you have paramilitaries and terrorist groups that take advantage of this disarray. But we have proudly said in our foreign policy, we're not anywhere for nation building. We don't believe in that. We are only there to fight terrorists. And increasingly our technology allows us to do it out of the Oval Office, where kill lists then go to drone missile battery assignments, and we are ending up killing a lot of people and a lot of children and women, along with a lot of soldiers and terrorists, no doubt, as well. But it's not solving any problem at all in this long stretch, which is becoming more violent and in more disarray, because if the underlying problems are not essentially military problems, but are problems of sustainable development, it's not surprising that you can't solve them through a military approach. Now, all of this has put the U.S. on an increasing course of alienation and isolation from the rest of the world. It's very odd these days how the attitudes here really conflict with the mainstream attitudes in so much of the rest of the world. And we see this manifested increasingly in the number of almost universally accepted treaties, goals, conventions adopted at the United Nations, where the United States is one of a small handful of countries that does not sign on. We are one of the few countries that did not sign the treaty, the Convention on Biological Diversity, for example. We have especially that great environmentalist Newt Gingrich to thank for that, who explained to the U.S. Senate that property rights guarantee the right to destroy species. Don't let the UN take away that right. And the U.S. Senate refused to ratify the Convention on Biological Diversity. As you know, we have not adhered to the International Criminal Court. We are not going to sign the new Small Arms Treaty that was nearly universally adopted by the United Nations last week, because the Senate has voted now by a majority already that this is a backdoor to take away Americans' rights to guns. This is a treaty about limiting the flow of arms to unstable regions of the world. The whole world has signed up to it, but not the United States. We are one of the three countries in the world. Our company is Somalia and South Sudan, not to join the Convention on the Rights of the Child, because we view this as an infringement on the right to abuse your children, apparently. And so even though this was part of an American initiative originally, it became tainted by the fact that the rest of the world liked the idea. And when the rest of the world decided they liked the idea, America decided it must be wrong. The similar fate came to the Convention on Disabilities, which the U.S. Senate recently rejected, again after a U.S. model law was adopted by the world's governments at the United Nations, which proved once again to the United States that they must have made a mistake in adopting this in the first place. Now we have to reject it. This is a weird country, ladies and gentlemen. It is. I'm sorry to say it. It's very strange what's happening, and not very safe. Now, at the same time, there are many dimensions of America that are absolutely amazing still, and I would say even unique in the world. This remains, despite the rise of fantastic talent all over the world, the most innovative part of the world for science and technological change. That's really a remarkable fact, because a lot of countries around the world are pursuing science and technology and doing a wonderful job of it. But the United States, I think it's fair to say, by most measures, though the gap has narrowed with other countries, remains a remarkably innovative country. And this is an extraordinarily heartening fact, because we need innovation to address a lot of these problems. Second, of course, America remains a wonderfully diverse society, perhaps in many ways the most diverse in the world. And this is a thrill for a diverse world. America is a microcosm, and New York is a microcosm of America, and this audience is a microcosm of New York in a lot of ways. I don't know how many countries are represented here, but I'd guess that it's probably 60 or 70 countries that are places of origin or your homes just in this room alone. And that's an extraordinarily special fact, and I think a great gift for our society in a global era. And it gives America a uniqueness and a vitality and a potential ability to reach the world that we've turned down recently, but that could be rekindled. And I would say the third feature of America that is still true today, though one that can never be taken for granted, is the capacity for reinvention. This is a society that knows how to change, and that does change, and where changes can come from within and can come in a surprisingly short period of time. We've watched it recently on gay rights. We've watched it on gay marriage, on changes of norms and standards that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago and then came very quickly. And I think America is very unusual in this regard, and it's one of our strongest points, and we shouldn't lose respect for it, appreciation for it, or fail to draw hope from it, because it is so important for what lies ahead. So if we have these big problems, we have to analyze them. And the analysis that I would offer very briefly is an analysis that leads us to sustainable development as an organizing framework for understanding our problems and for addressing these problems. The crisis is multidimensional. There isn't one single key to what's happening. It is by nature a mess, and it is by nature an intersecting set of forces and drivers. And on all of these dimensions that I'm going to mention, one sees interconnections with other aspects of the crisis. Partly the crisis that we're facing and Europe is facing in the economic sphere is a crisis of globalization and technological change. The world economy has changed deeply in the last 30 years. Production systems became highly globalized. What used to be produced in the United States routinely in manufacturing went overseas, and millions of jobs were lost and effectively transferred to China or to Mexico or to other regions. this was very consequential for the United States. On the whole, I believe this process was hugely beneficial for the world and can be beneficial for the U.S. as well, but it's a phenomenon that needs to be understood, appreciated, and responded to. Until today, we have not been ready to do so. Similarly, technology, especially the rise of the information age, is pervasively changing every sector of our economy. And if nearly 10 million jobs have been lost in manufacturing, I'd roughly put half of them lost to globalization and the other half to technological change in the long term. Higher productivity, meaning that robotics, information technology, and a lot more to come has been able to substitute for work that was a traditional part of American middle-class labor force. That's on the economic side. On the social side has come a dramatic widening of inequality of income and power, political power. The income widening is partly the response to the economic factors that I just mentioned. Both globalization and the technological change has raised the incomes of those with a college degree. For our students here, be sure to finish. Continue on. It's a good rate of return. It's also good for your lives and for your future leadership. But for those who do not have a college degree in this country, they've seen, if not the bottom fall out, the end of progress and a decline of real incomes that has become quite stark for those at the lower end of the skill and education distribution. So that's the economic driver of social inequality. But in our country, this has been tremendously amplified by politics, by the kind of politics I mentioned on Wall Street, by the big money in politics, by the fact that our campaigns now cost several $billions. Last year's presidential campaign was $1 billion of each candidate. Both candidates were utterly beholden to large, powerful, wealthy interests. If you're disappointed in Mr. Obama, look to who his campaign supporters are, because that's what drives a great deal of the policy in this country. And this is the underlying reality, that our political system has amplified the social inequalities through allowing for the abuses of tax havens, through gimmicks in the tax code, through breaking the trade unions, through many steps that have been taken, through incredible deregulation of the health sector, allowing our health industry to raise prices and use their market power in a way not seen in any other high-income country in the world, where prices in the health sector are strongly regulated. Not here. Anything you can get away with, you're allowed to get away with, whether you're a hedge fund or a hospital. And this is what the lobbyists allow you to do. I've mentioned, of course, the third aspect of the crisis, which is another driver of this. It's not logically the same, that the ecological crisis has come from the fact of our economic success. Ours and China's and the emerging economies have meant that the world economy, which is now about $80 trillion of annual production, is so big that its impact on the physical earth is now astoundingly so large that the geologists have had to give a new name to the epoch of the earth. We now call our age not the Holocene, which is the period after the Ice Age. We now call this epoch the Anthropocene, a new era on the planet where humanity is the main driver of fundamental Earth processes, including climate, the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, biogeography, ocean acidification, things that used to happen only because nature was changing through plate tectonics and other dynamics, now are happening in a short period of time at human hands. It's dramatic, but it's absolutely frightening that we have one political party paid never to acknowledge this, and the other political party paid to wring its hands and say there's nothing we can do about it. And so, despite the deepening crisis, we're adrift. That's the third area. The fourth dimension of this crisis, and the fifth, I would say, are values and governance. On values, this is a good question, how we got here, but when I tried in a recent book, The Price of Civilization, to compare the extent of commercialism in society by looking at indicators of television watching, media, advertising, and so forth, the United States is way off the charts. We watch more TV, see more commercials, are more media hit than any other society in the world. And, of course, we have I don't know if it's a dominant ethos, but it's one that is propounded and pounded into us of hyper-individualism. We are not reminded day to day to be nice to our neighbors and to our friends and to our colleagues. We're reminded day to day that you too can sit at the head of the table. And when President Obama came and gave his commencement address at Barnard, that's what he told the graduates. Said, you can be the head of the table. Don't forget that. Okay, that's fine. I think it's a strange message, because the message is actually fight for first all the time, relentlessly. And don't matter that you have everything you could conceivably want right now and need, so that you could take a little bit of space back and do something for somebody else. No, you have a chance to someday have your picture with these guys. Want to take home $1 billion? No thanks, not to me, but some people do. And we've created an ethos that is a really important thing to do. And I can tell you, I know a lot of these people. You can't believe it. It's not like they know very much. Honestly, no, truly, I mean it. This is just scientific observation. But they probably have a drive that is extraordinary. Maybe their drive for money is 4 standard deviations from the mean. And that's something weird, but it's there. And then we have a governance crisis, of course. The political system not only is messed up in money, but I think, I don't have a lot of colleagues who share this view, but I think we're really creaking under a system that was invented in 1789. So we have a constitution that is roughly 220 years old. It's too old, it's out of date, it's antiquated, and it's revered. And we have a Supreme Court, like a group of religious savants, trying to figure out what did the Founding Fathers really mean when they thought about the internet? And what did they really mean about climate change? It's weird. Of course, that's what religions do, and in a way we have created an apotheosis of the Founding Fathers, who were very clever people, no question. But I think the system is antiquated myself. And it is not responsive. It's not, I would never, by the way, recommend a presidential system to anybody. So if you happen to be on a constitutional convention at some point, and most other countries have them at some point or other, go for a parliamentary system. At least you have a government. And when you have a government, it can propose a budget and pass it in the parliament. We don't have a government. We have 536 little power centers, those in the House, those in the Senate, and one in the White House. And there's, no matter what you propose, you have to assemble coalitions of the willing through backroom deals. And that, of course, caters to the vested interests to the maximum extent possible. So I believe that our political system is antiquated and dysfunctional, not only because of the ideological divisions. Now, I promised you that there's a way out of this, and I do think there is a way out of this, because if the problem was we've run out of everything, there's nothing we can do, we used to depend on X, but it's gone, we've destroyed everything, it would be a different kind of problem from the one we have. The problem we have is actually a failure to master prosperity. We've arrived as a prosperous, wealthy, productive society, and we can't use it even for our own survival. We still believe that at $50,000 per capita, the single most important thing in the world is the growth rate of GNP. And even in the midst of climate change and more disasters and raging forest fires and droughts, we still can't get it through our head that this is important. And we still can't get it through our head that if there are many kids in this country, 20% or so, who are growing up in real deep poverty and don't have a chance, many of them, their dads are in prison because of this mass incarceration, that maybe we ought to be doing something about that if we want our society to be a normal, decent society. We can't get that through our heads, that that's part of the story. So the problem isn't that we don't have what to do. The problem is that we don't have a way to think about it, speak about it, rally to the values around it, and create a politics around it. And I do think in a country that can reinvent itself, and has in the past, we can do this. I believe that sustainable development is an appropriate framework. And when you look at what the precepts are, I think they fit extraordinarily well. The basic idea of sustainable development is that society should be addressing 4 concerns, not 1. Yes, we should be addressing economic concerns. Of course, in economic growth, that's okay. Definitely in concerns for people with lower income. But GNP cannot be our talisman. It can't be our central driver. It shouldn't be for a society that's already reached this kind of mass wealth and affluence. So sustainable development says there are 3 other things of profound significance. The second is social inclusion, that a society is healthy and decent if it carries everybody along with it. That a society in which the top 1% has 90% of the net worth, or the top 1% has 23% of the income, isn't a healthy society. And where there is still mass poverty in such a society, the paradox is even greater. And where you've had 30 years of rising inequality, but our politicians dare not speak the word poverty, you know that something is seriously wrong. So social inclusion is the second pillar of sustainable development. The third, of course, is environmental sustainability. And this is an issue that is of our time more than was true for any generation in human history till now. Many societies and civilizations wrecked their environment, but there was always a place to go. Now the world's filled. 7.2 billion people, almost inevitably reaching 8 billion by the middle of the next decade. If we continue on the current trajectory, more than 10 billion people by the end of this century. Not a good prospect for those people and their well-being. This is a crowded planet with a tremendously high use of primary commodities, and therefore we put ourselves on a collision course with basic ecological realities. The best phrasing of this is that we are exceeding the planetary boundaries. This, I think, is the most powerful vision that the ecologists have offered in a 2009 Nature magazine paper called The Safe Operating Space for Humanity, with the lead author Johan Rockström of the Stockholm Resilience Center. The idea of planetary boundaries for greenhouse gas emissions, for fresh water use, for ocean acidification, for nitrogen and phosphorus loading, and so forth, gives us a framework for understanding the boundaries that nature itself imposes, and that tells us if we're going to grow and develop, we have to grow and develop with technologies that are compatible with those ecological thresholds and realities. What will it be like if we really acidify the oceans, kill off all the corals, destroy the food webs, and destroy the protein sources that feed humanity and that make the marine ecosystems work? Well, we're on that trajectory in the 21st century. It's just incredible. And yet we can't get the salience of this. And the final dimension of sustainable development is governance and accountability. The idea that if there are principles of economic, social, and environmental norms and objectives, that we need governance that attaches to that and that makes it possible to implement sustainable development strategies. And governance means a lot of things. It's more than government, though government is one place to start, because government is part of the challenge, but I would say the corporate sector is the other place where governance is vitally needed. The world's most powerful institutions, not militarily but in every other sense, are the large multinational companies. They run the governments. Sometimes when I watch the G20 leaders and they sit around the table and they're wringing their hands, I say, why don't we just cut to the chase? Put the 20 big businesses around the table, then we'll have the principals there, not the agents. They can make the decisions. All the politicians are thinking is, what is Exxon going to say? What is JP Morgan going to say? And so we need governance standards for the companies as well. And this is part of the doctrine of sustainable development. So my view is that that four-dimensioned vision of society is a much improved way of looking at problems, diagnosing them, and moving towards solutions. And that if we can keep in mind that a healthy society is one that pursues economic, social, environmental, and governance standards, and measures them, follows them, monitors them, uses them for feedback, for social correction, for new innovation, for guiding political change, then we have a chance. And that is the idea of the Sustainable Development Goals. That's why I regard them as potentially among the most important things that could emerge in the next few years. Mercifully, they don't have to be ratified by the U.S. Senate. These would be voluntary, non-treaty-based objectives adopted by the world's governments. I think the U.S. government could adopt them, and certainly should adopt them, and need not stand in the way, because I think President Obama probably agrees with all of this. But he wouldn't want to submit it to the Senate. And one indication, by the way, why he might not want to submit it to the Senate is House Bill number 2366 in the Kansas State Legislature. It was filed in March. I just thought I would read you a new Senate bill being considered by the Kansas State Legislature. Being enacted by the legislature of the state of Kansas, Section 1, no public funds may be used either directly or indirectly to promote, support, mandate, require, order, incentivize, advocate, plan for, participate in, or implement sustainable development. Isn't that nice? This prohibition on the use of public funds shall apply to 1, any activity by any state governmental entity or municipality. Sustainable development in this legislation means a mode of human development in which resource use aims to meet human needs while preserving the environment so that these needs can be met not only in the present, but also for generations to come. No legislation can conceivably go for that purpose. It seems like a joke. In a way, it is, of course. But when you actually go back and look, as I did when somebody sent this to me, this state legislator in Kansas is funded by the Koch brothers. And the Koch brothers are, as you know, the largest private oil industry in the world. Between the two of them, they have about $60 billion of wealth. And as I say, our politicians come cheap. So you just have to buy them off at a very low rate. A tiny fraction of a day's income for these guys is probably enough to buy the Kansas State Legislature. And this is where this particular piece of garbage came from. But this is a challenge that we're going to have to face. Now, what would it mean to apply Sustainable Development Goals for the United States? I counted it up, and I would say that it is introducing a new ethic in the following areas, and very, very quickly, and then I'll open it up for discussion. First, the most successful countries in the world, very much contrary to our own, operate on a strong ethic of inclusion or an ethos of equality. The most successful countries in balancing economy, society, environment, good governance in the world are the Scandinavian countries. The social democracies of Northern Europe rank at the top in lowest poverty, lowest corruption levels, longest life expectancy, longest leisure time, by the way, highest expressed well-being in questions of life satisfaction and happiness, highest levels of social trust, lowest levels of crime, and cleanest energy systems and most sustainable environment. Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland. And the governing ethos of those societies is one of inclusion and equality. I think it's the starting point. What it means for public policy is something that President Obama emphasized. We'll see whether anything happens, but that's the idea that every child gets a decent start, early childhood development, investing in the well-being of young children, and then ensuring that they have a path onward. We're not doing that at all in this country. We are tracking our kids already by age 5 or 6. Poor kids are not ready for school. They go to poor schools in difficult neighborhoods, and they never find their way out. And we would have to change course if we're going to bring back to a unified society with social mobility, not a divided society that has about the lowest social mobility of all the high-income world. Second, of course, is the ethos of sustainability. And that would mean moving not to an all-of-the-above energy system, but moving to a low-carbon energy system, one that is viable for the planet. We have refused to do the most basic energy arithmetic in this country. I can tell you, I begged for it from this government, what's your energy plan? They will not write an energy plan. They do not want to be held hostage. They do not want to go against the oil companies, and they have refused to think seriously about this issue. And that's the ones on the side of doing something. That's how bad it is. Third, we will need an ethic of mindfulness. We are living in the short term for problems that require a long-term perspective. I think the best thing this country could do would be to unplug the TV for about 3 hours a day, because the average television viewing time is about 7 hours a day. And not only do you sit plugged in front of the TV, does one sit plugged in front of the TV in this country, but one is constantly bombarded, almost as in no other place in the world, by advertisements, so that a typical young person in this country has seen 25 or 30 million ads by the time they reach roughly about age 25. And that's a disaster. Fourth is a new ethos of governance. I've spoken about the need to change how we govern ourselves and how we make decisions. The problem is right now, most of the challenges that I've talked about are complicated. They do not have easy answers. They do not have shovel-ready solutions. They are not problems of aggregate demand management. They're not something that the Fed can fix. They're not something that a one-year tax cut can fix. They're not something that a stimulus can fix. All of these, in my mind, are the wrong category for understanding America's challenges. But we don't have another language right now. I'll say something utterly heretical. We need a Department of Planning in this country. Of course, this is the least likely thing to happen in America because planning is deemed to be the worst thing possible. That's communism to an American ear. And none less authoritative than Larry Summers in the White House said to me, "Jeffrey, in America, we do not plan." And he meant that positively. And I'm still shaking from hearing that 4 years later. Finally, or not finally, second from last, we need an ethos of knowledge. And I believe the universities have a unique role to play in this. There is no way out of this crisis by simply simplification. It's a dream. Why don't we stop the nitrogen pollution by just going organic, for example? There's a reason. If we just went organic, billions of people wouldn't have food to eat right now. We could have been organic, perhaps, when the population was 1/7 of what it is right now. We came to use more than 100 million metric tons of nitrogen each year because there are massive numbers of people, and because we use that nitrogen, more people came and could be supported. So we actually did what Malthus warned us about. Grow more food, you'll also grow more people unless you think about it, and take some precautions to make sure that family planning and empowerment of women ensures that population doesn't chase the food supply. But we have no simple way out. We need electricity. We need power. We need transport. And if you think that we don't, come with me to one of the villages in Africa. I'll show you a place that uses organic farming, has no electricity, a very small footprint on the world, and unfortunately, and with all seriousness, the children die in huge numbers because life could not be more difficult, staying alive could not be more difficult. In other words, we live in a high technology society for a reason, and we get a lot of benefit out of it, but if we don't take care, it will also destroy what we've made. And so we're going to need to be more subtle and more complex, knowledge-based. And universities are the unique repository, in my view, of the range of knowledge. And if we hold to our values of the range of knowledge that is deployed in the interest of knowledge and with values behind it, not in the pure pursuit of money, that we can actually be the locations around the world to help solve these problems. One of the things that's most exciting and what I'm lucky to be doing right now on behalf of the UN and under the auspices of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is establishing a Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which Raquel mentioned in her kind introduction. And what that is a network of universities around the world, with the idea that if the universities around the world join forces, then universities each in their locations can be champions of solutions in their home cities, in their home countries, in their home regions. No one, by the way, is going to solve problems of somebody else anymore, if they ever did. Each place is going to have to be author of its own solutions, but working together. And I think a network of universities around the world organized around sustainable development, a role the Earth Institute aims to play, can be an extraordinarily powerful approach. And finally and last is the ethos of peace, because we will not get to where we need to get if we remain militarized in our view, and if we remain with the view that the world is hostile rather than that the world is sharing in these struggles. And that, I think, has become one of America's greatest obstacles and one that we have to overcome. And I'll close by noting that we are at a 50th anniversary of one pivotal event that can give us hope, and that is that 51 years ago, the world almost destroyed itself in the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. And the world came closer to destruction than it ever had before or since. And out of that near Armageddon, both the leaders of the US and the Soviet Union, John Kennedy and Chairman Nikita Khrushchev of the Soviet Union, decided that they had come too close and it was too dangerous. They each realized they were surrounded by hardliners that told them to shoot first, think later, and that even their own teams were very dangerous, and that therefore they too, almost uniquely in the world, faced the responsibility to find a way out of that calamity. And in the period after the Cuban Missile Crisis was what I regard as one of the greatest acts of leadership in modern history, which was John Kennedy's determination to sign a treaty with the Soviet Union to stop the danger and spread of nuclear arms. And in the summer of 1963, despite all the odds of the Cold War, Kennedy and Khrushchev signed the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And that became the immediate progenitor of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which followed a few years later. And the story of how John Kennedy did that, in my view, is absolutely captivating. I've recently finished a little book on it because I was so taken with this act of leadership and vision that in the midst of the Cold War and controversy, one could see a way to actually find peace. And the most important thing for Kennedy was understanding that the counterpart had the same problems. The counterpart had the same challenges. The other side wasn't evil. The other side had all of the doubts. It had the hardliners. It had the softliners. It had the confusion. It had everything. But they were also human beings, and the other side was human beings filled with their own virtues and strengths as well. And in what is my favorite all-time speech by an American president, President Kennedy spoke about peace in the summer of 1963, on June 10, 1963, so we're coming up to the 50th anniversary of this. And he gave a speech which in history has become known as the Peace Speech. And he said something in this that I think is the ultimate ethic of sustainable development. And the words, to my mind, resonate utterly till today. He said, "So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and to the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal." Thank you very much. So I went on a long time, and you were very kind, and we have a few minutes, if you have patience, for at least a couple of questions. So there are mics here. Just ask you to tell me your name, and then go ahead, please.
Oh, hi, I'm Matthew Sheridan, a first year at Columbia Engineering. And so my main question regarded your ethos of knowledge. You know, I just came into Columbia University and our orientation told us nothing about the problems that you mentioned. They told us that we were the most wonderful class that was ever admitted to Columbia University ever, and we were, you know, basically entitled to a role of privilege. And so I do like your idea that you're going to get the different world universities to work together and solve all these problems. But at the individual level, I feel like there's not much to convince the individual that the education that they're going to receive and the power they're going to get in the future should actually be applied to good purposes. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on what could be done to our current university to improve it and to, I guess, share these messages. So at least get them to think about the questions and what you would like us to do.
Great, thanks a lot. I'm sure it's right that you're the most wonderful class, and also it is true you're very privileged to be here, as we all are, by the way. So this is, by definition, we're very, very lucky, and we're in an extraordinarily small percentage of the world to have this opportunity, and this really is a great place, I have to stress. But I do believe that universities need to be problem-solving parts of our society, and that's sometimes not admitted so much, like you say, or it's not emphasized. We have a part of American university tradition which is very explicit about this, called the land-grant institutions, which are the schools, Iowa State or Michigan State or Texas A&M or Cornell, which are institutions that received a grant of land from the federal government under the Morrill Act, which was signed by Abraham Lincoln in 1862. So also 150th anniversary last year. And those universities are actually chartered to be useful. So they're told, you're not ivory towers, you are being chartered and granted land by the federal government to help solve the problems of your community. I really like that. And in fact, of course, great universities like Columbia have played such a role, but I don't think we're always clear enough about that role as being part of the DNA and part of the social responsibility. One of the things we've done, I'll just speak for our own corner of this university, is the Earth Institute, which is a university-wide initiative very strongly supported by the leadership of the university, which has as its banner sustainable development, and takes the sense of responsibility, whether it's in New York City or halfway around the world in Mali, to help work on these very problems. And we push the university boundaries, I have to say, because we say we have to be out there, we have to be solving problems, we have to be in uncomfortable places sometimes, but that's the job of the university. So I'd encourage you to get involved in the Earth Institute. There's also a great major I'll proselytize for sustainable development. And so these are opportunities, and I'm sure Raquel will confirm every word I've just said. Right. Great, thanks.
Hello, my name is Karina Zhugla. I am a first year in Columbia College. And my question was, it sounded like you identified more or less institutions as the potential vehicles of change in this vision that you laid out for us. So is there anything that we can do on the level of the citizen and maybe collectively to push those institutions in the right direction?
I think that we saw last year with the Occupy movement something that was, I thought, very creative and important myself, which was really holding up a pretty powerful spotlight on Wall Street. And it was so effective when they occupied Zuccotti Park downtown that the world's media rushed there. And so they took the police to clear the kids out. And in a way, they were right to do so, because if the kids had stayed there, we would have actually gotten a lot farther politically. It was really driving a lot of eyes to the needed changes. And Wall Street knew it and took action to finally stop it. And once it was out of the public view, it kind of dissipated. Throughout American history, there have been waves of political action, and I'm hoping we can be in the next wave. One of the great historians of America, Arthur Schlesinger Jr., had a theory of long cycles of American politics, and he said America cycled between the public purpose and the private purpose. And so the private purpose are the times of greed, which I would say started with Reagan, if I had to date it, and have continued till today. Basically, we're still in that private purpose world of the billion-dollar annual incomes, which is just an obscenity in my view. And yet those waves of private greed, like the robber baron age or the roaring 20s, or this one, will give way to a period of public action and public need. And the two great episodes of there are three great episodes of American history I would suggest are good role models for us in important ways. One is the Progressive Era. The robber baron age was followed by the Progressive Era, and one of the greatest leaders of that, after about 20 years of social action, came to the White House, Teddy Roosevelt. Then, 33 years later, a distant cousin, another great Roosevelt, came to the White House and played a very similar role with the New Deal. And these were transformative for America. And those waves of progressivism and then the New Deal also had their 20 or 30 year influence, finally giving way to something different. The third period was the 1960s. Very tumultuous, but it was the civil rights era, and it was a major breakthrough in civil rights and in some of the social policies. But when Lyndon Johnson tried to make a war on poverty, unfortunately he also made a war on Vietnam, and unfortunately the right wing also made a war on Johnson. And when you added it up, that became truncated, and through all of the turmoil that followed, it led to a very deep swing of the pendulum. I have said, but could be wrong, but it's part hope and part prediction, that we're entering a new progressive era. I thought it was going to come with President Obama. I supported him strongly. I hoped for more. I could not believe how Wall Street so much infiltrated the administration and how needed reforms were cut short. I predicted that he would go the way, I mean, not predicted, but I worried very much that because of his affection for tax cuts and short-termism, we'd never get onto these long-term challenges, and I'm afraid that that's more or less what happens. We'll have another chance. I'm hoping that we can have even a third party, but a true progressive candidate who is of talent and can lead a movement in 2016. It could make a big difference. In this country, never lose hope, because things change. They really do change, and we will go to a new period, and we're really ripe for it, because this long phase of Reaganism has not only run its course, it's led to so much damage, so much toxicity in our society, that we really are ripe for a change.
Would you consider running for president?
I'm sorry?
Would you consider running for president?
Please.
Hi, my name is Shlomo. I'm Shlomo Finger. I'm a GS applicant. And you mentioned twice that part of the reasons why politicians are so susceptible to corruption is because of their low salaries. And that resonated a lot with me because in my community, the Haredi Orthodox community, rabbis are always having to charge for the littlest things because the salaries are not up to date. Would we be able to afford paying competitive salaries to politicians?
Yeah, actually I said they sell themselves cheap. I don't know whether it's literally their salary or not, but one interesting model along your lines is Singapore. It's a very, very sophisticated government. It's an authoritarian government in some sense, but it's an extremely sophisticated government. And what Lee Kuan Yew said already 40 years ago is, my cabinet will be the highest paid officials on the island, because I don't want the second best. If we're going to regulate a company, I want someone that's paid more than the CEO of that company. Now, I think that part of the answer could be decent salaries. Part of the answer is to stop the underlying abuses which allow CEOs to pay themselves $1 billion a year, because there's this is completely unacceptable as well. So this kind of, if I went through story by story of these people, you know, as I said, this guy, 1.4 billion, his staff is being carried off to prison as he's taking this $1 billion salary right now. So this is, there are abuses here that just by common sense ought to stop. And I do think that there is a way to political life, perhaps, that gets around the corruption issue. The real reason that the politicians are taking money is not their own salaries, it's to run their campaigns. So the real role of money in politics is the large expenditure on advertising. And like everything else in American society, everything, it all comes to advertising in the end. And politics has become the media show, just as so much of the rest of our society becomes. And so they want to raise millions of dollars to run TV ads, but they're also very worried that if they step on the wrong foot, the Koch brothers are going to run millions of dollars of ads against them. And that's where the real money challenge lies, not in their specific individual salaries. What I'm interested in knowing is whether a candidate could win without any campaign financing now that we live in a social media world. If I were running for president, what I would do is say no campaign contributions at all and let 1,000 media sources write stories about that, whether it's stupid, whether it's smart, whether it's not, but completely do it through social media in the end. It's all free. You can have your own TV stations, you can have your own webcast, podcasts, YouTube, you can have your millions of Twitter followers, you can do all sorts of wonderful things without spending a penny now. And so some very, very social media savvy movement could do this without money and actually make a virtue. We're the ones that aren't on the take. And that, I think, would be a very powerful way to campaign. That here is a party that accepts no money. We're not bought by Wall Street. We're not bought like those other guys are. And we will reflect your views. Because fundamentally, that's still there for the taking. There still is a market for votes. And if you can convince the voters and if you can reach them that will really represent you, not the top decile, I think it's a pretty powerful message and one that could resonate. And my feeling, I don't know, part of my problem is I don't watch TV. So I don't really know. Every time I do, turn it off. So I don't really know what goes on day to day. But my sense of the Obama campaign was that the Will I Am ad, Yes We Can, was worth $10 million of TV advertising, and it was for free. And that, to my mind, is the model of how to campaign in the present day. And if you can do that, you can make a virtue and a reality of saying, I take no money from anybody. No PACs, no contributions, no sellouts, pure free media. That's the strategy I recommend to someone here.
Thank you so much.
Please.
Yes, my question is similar because there's such an infestation of corporate influence and money in our politics. And with a time of Citizens United, there are some movements for campaign finance reform, disclosure, and even divestment. What do you suggest that we can do to actually maybe, if possibly, overturn Citizens United, increase or decrease the influence of corporations in our government?
I don't think, well, of course, if Mr. Scalia would do something more socially useful with his life, which is just about anything else from what he's doing right now, we might have a chance because he really is an influence on this country that is so amazingly harmful. It's shocking. He's written a lot of these major opinions. And the Supreme Court could change, and we could get a Supreme Court that doesn't equate corporate free speech, corporate contributions with free speech. The fact that they can't tell that apart is a very serious mark on the level of jurisprudence in the U.S. Supreme Court right now. But what I'm saying is that even aside from the campaign finance laws, which I doubt are going to change, because the people that have to vote them are the ones that live on this system, with free media, we may not need to change them. There just may be a way to reach enough people widely, relentlessly, for free, that we don't have to actually change this. That's what I would try. Maybe one more?
Brandon Tarbert, SEPA, Energy and Environment. So given the lack of political willpower and short-sightedness, do you think the answer lies in the private sector to deploy clean energy infrastructure through the United States? And do you think that the bond schemes that was launched by Buffett for the Topaz solar array in California, do you think that's an avenue we need to take?
I think that it is possible to lead from those who believe in first mover advantages, and it's possible to lead with clearer ideas coming from universities and from some parts of the private sector. The best solution, if we could ever get it, for climate change, by far, among everything, would be to outcompete fossil fuel. It's not impossible. We're not that far away anymore. Solar power was about $70 a watt in 1977, and it's now 70 cents a watt today. And so we've had a 100-fold reduction of the cost of a solar cell over that period. Wind power is already grid competitive in many, many places, and in fact it could be deployed grid competitive on a massive basis if the regulatory issues could be solved. Offshore wind off the northeast of the United States could power virtually all the energy needs of the Northeast. Admittedly, the intermittency still is not fully technologically solved, but even with the intermittency, we could do a great deal more than we're doing right now. So the best way to win this battle is actually to win the battle with fossil fuels. And in one sense, the news there is not all bleak. The price of oil has about roughly tripled in the last 10 years in real terms. It went in nominal terms from $25 a barrel to about $100 a barrel now. And this reflects the fact that there is an underlying depletion. Of course, natural gas has come down because of hydrofracking, but my view is, my guess is that this is actually not the transformative, low-cost, inexhaustible supply that it's being hyped, but is a much more transitory, limited, and environmentally costly solution than the hype. And so one aspect to this solution is that we are going to face rising costs of traditional fuels, and we could face falling costs of true, clean 21st century fuels. That's the easy way, and we're not so far away from that. The hard way, of course, is to say, in addition to the market forces, we need to put a thumb on the scale to give added impetus to the clean energy to take into account the social costs of the dirty energy. That's where the political process has been broken. Yet, even with that, many local areas and some businesses are saying, I don't want to end up with stranded, dirty technology. I want to lead, and if I can figure out how to do this, there's going to be a market for me in the future. The politics aren't right now, but why wait? I'll be a leader 10 years or 20 years from now. And that means that there are enough people who believe in the first mover advantage that we can see some movement ahead. So we shouldn't be pessimistic by any means, but the pace of change that's required is unprecedented. To remake the DNA of the world's energy system at the pace that we're talking about would be a gargantuan task, and we haven't gotten started, and we have about 40 years to do it, and you guys are going to have to do it. So that, I always say, is your homework assignment. You have 40 years to remake the energy system, to end poverty, to make social inclusion. That's your homework. But the good news is it's open book, and you can work in groups. Thank you very much, everybody.